Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new stories where mystery, emotion and truth meet. Turn on notifications to receive alerts for each new chapter as soon as it's published. And now tell me, where are you watching this story from? Write your country or city in the comments. I love to know how far our stories are reaching. The night wind swept across the hills of San Jose, whistling between the jagged towers of the old Winchester mansion. The lights of the modern city pulsed in the distance, but there, on that vast, silent grounds, time seemed still. The house stood like an open scar on American history, immense, labyrinthine, built without apparent logic, doors that opened onto walls, staircases that led to the ceiling, corridors that ended in nothing, a monument to fear. That night, Ethan Caldwell, he parked his car in front of the rusty iron gate. An investigative journalist, known for uncovering corporate scandals, he had been hired by a private historical foundation to produce a definitive documentary about the Winchester mansion. The pay was far too high for a simple cultural project. Something about that invitation had always seemed strange to him. Still, his professional curiosity outweighed any premonitions. Ethan carried only a backpack, a camera, and a recorder. As he crossed the gate, he noticed there was no reception staff, no security guards, no employees waiting, just the house, watching him like an ancient animal. On the other side of the property, a female figure waited on the main porch, Margaret Hale, director of the Hale Foundation for Historic Preservation. Her grey hair was pulled back in an impeccable bun, and her eyes seemed polished by decades of secrets. When Ethan approached, she smiled, a calculated, cold smile. "Mr. Caldwell, finally." His voice was soft but firm. "The Winchester mansion always chooses who enters." Ethan ignored the strange phrase and squeezed her hand. Her touch was icy. Margaret led him inside. The interior of the mansion smelled of old wood, dust, and something metallic that was hard to identify. The creaking of the floorboards echoed through endless corridors. Each door seemed to lead to a different destination, or nowhere at all. "The Foundation wants an honest documentary," Margaret explained as they walked. "No supernatural legends for tourists. We want the historical truth." "The truth always sells better," Ethan replied, discreetly turning on the recorder in his pocket. She stopped before a simple door, unlike the others, without ornamentation. She opened it slowly. "This will be your room. Don't go out at night. The house is confusing, even for those who know it." Ethan nodded, intrigued. It wasn't the first time he'd slept in strange places during investigations, but something was different here, a heavy, almost lifelike silence. When Margaret walked away, her footsteps faded without echo, as if the house had swallowed the sound. Ethan placed his equipment on the bed and began organizing his notes. He knew the official story. Sarah Winchester, heiress to the Winchester Arms fortune, had gone mad after the death of her daughter and husband. It was said she believed she was being haunted by the souls of those killed by her family's guns. To appease them, she built the mansion non-stop for almost 40 years. But Ethan didn't believe in legends. He believed in facts, contracts, bank transfers, hidden interests. What no one mentioned was that after Sarah's death, a considerable portion of the Winchester fortune disappeared without record. No direct heirs, no clear documents, just a chain of private foundations that mysteriously kept the house intact for over a century. The Hale Foundation was merely the current custodian, and Margaret Hale was the keeper of the keys. That same night, while Ethan was reviewing digital files, he noticed something strange. Many documents about the mansion had recently been removed from public databases. Licenses, restoration records, financing contracts, all replaced with summarized, vague, carefully edited versions. Someone wanted to control the narrative. Outside, a crack echoed down the hallway. Ethan looked up. Another crack. Then absolute silence. He opened the door slowly and peered down the hallway. The yellowish light flickered, no sign of movement. He decided to follow the sound. He walked down one corridor, then another, then a curved staircase leading down to a door he didn't remember seeing before. The doorknob turned on its own before he touched it. The room was small, without windows. In the center, a table, on it a brown envelope with his name handwritten on it, Ethan Caldwell. The journalist swallowed hard. He picked up the envelope. Inside there was only an old photograph, Sarah Winchester standing in front of the mansion, accompanied by an unknown man. On the back of the photo, a phrase written in almost faded ink. Fortune was never cursed. It was stolen. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't part of any known historical record, and someone in that house knew he was there and what he was looking for. When he left the room, the door behind him closed by itself, locking with a sharp click. Ethan was left alone in the endless hallway of the mansion, holding a photograph in hand, and a mystery that had never been in the books. The investigation had begun. Ethan spent the rest of the night trying to find his way back to his room again. The Winchester mansion defied logic. Stairs appeared where hallways had once been. Doors led to rooms already visited, but with furniture in different positions. The house seemed to be rearranging itself. When he finally reached his room, the sky was already brightening. He slept little. The distant sound of footsteps woke him several times, but he never found anyone in the hallways. In the morning, Margaret Hale awaited him in the dining room. The table was set with fresh coffee, fruit, and bread. Everything was immaculate, as if the house had never known dust or neglect. "Did you sleep well?" she asked, observing him with surgical precision. "Enough," Ethan replied, avoiding mentioning the secret room and the photograph. Margaret served coffee to both of them. "Today you can explore the main areas, but there are restricted wings. Some parts of the house are not safe." "Structurally?" Ethan asked. "Historically," she replied with a brief smile. After coffee, Margaret left him alone with an old map of the mansion. The drawing seemed impossible. Overlapping corridors, asymmetrical rooms, staircases ending at the ceiling. In the lower corner, a handwritten note. "Only those who know the purpose understand the path." Ethan put the map away and began his systematic exploration. He filmed every detail, every peculiar door, every window that opened onto interior walls. But his real interest lay in the administrative records. In the main office, he found a locked metal filing cabinet. The lock was old. After a few minutes using a simple lock-picking tool, a skill acquired from other investigations, the drawer gave way. Inside, dozens of folders organized by year. But not from the time of Sarah Winchester, only records from 1924 onwards, exactly after her death. The first pages revealed large financial transfers to an entity called Trust Aurora. Address, non-existent. Legal representative, M. Hall. Ethan photographed everything. Before he could continue, he heard firm footsteps in the hallway. He closed the drawer, put away his equipment, and left as if he were merely filming the architecture. Margaret appeared at the door. "Did you find anything interesting?" he asked, without changing his tone. "Just the eccentric genius of Sarah Winchester," Ethan replied. Margaret held his gaze for a few seconds. Then she nodded. "This house holds stories that the public wouldn't understand. Some truths are more dangerous than fantasies." After lunch, Ethan decided to visit the gardens. As he walked through the outdoor area, he found a man cleaning tools near a small, secluded building. "You're the new journalist," the man said without raising his head. "I am. Thomas Reed, I take care of the maintenance." Ethan extended his hand. Thomas shook it quickly, firmly. His fingers were calloused, marked by hard work. "Do you live here?" Ethan asked. 15 years ago, Thomas pointed to the mansion. "I know every passage, every sound, every night." "And you've never seen anything strange?" Thomas smiled, but not in a gleeful way. "Strange is he who comes seeking answers. The house only reflects those who enter. Before Ethan could ask any more questions, Margaret called from the balcony, ending the conversation. Late in the afternoon, Ethan reviewed his notes. The mysterious photograph wouldn't leave his mind. The man next to Sarah Winchester wasn't listed in any public historical record. He decided to do a facial search in old databases. After hours of cross-referencing digitized images from 19th century newspapers, a result appeared. The same face. Name, Jonathan Hale, original founder of the Hale Foundation, the man who officially acquired the mansion after Sarah Winchester's death. Ethan leaned back in his chair. If Jonathan Hale was in the photograph next to Sarah, then the Hale family hadn't just inherited the mansion. They had been there from the beginning. From before Sarah's death, from the construction, the public narrative was beginning to crumble. At that moment, the electrical system flickered. The lights went out for a second. When they returned, Ethan's monitor displayed a new message that had been automatically typed onto the screen. Stop digging. No sender. No traceable origin. Ethan slowly closed the laptop. The Winchester mansion was not haunted. He kept human secrets, and someone there was willing to protect them. Ethan woke before sunrise. It hadn't been a natural awakening. A metallic noise had jolted him from his sleep. It came from somewhere beneath the floorboards. A rhythmic sound, like muffled hammer blows, constant, organized. He stood up, put on his jacket, and went out into the still dark hallway. The mansion was asleep, but the sound continued. He traced the noise to a narrow staircase leading to a basement. The door was ajar. He descended slowly. The basement didn't appear on the map Margaret had provided. The space was large, supported by old beams. Industrial lamps illuminated work tables, lined-up metal boxes, modern computers, cables, safes. In the center, Thomas Reed was working at a workbench, disassembling an old mechanical object. "I knew you were curious," Thomas said, without turning around. Ethan approached slowly. "What is this place?" Thomas put down the tool and wiped his hands on a cloth. "Archives and workshop." No, he pointed to the boxes. "Everything that's been removed from the house over the years, diaries, letters, contracts, original maps, none of that can be made public. By order of the Hale Foundation." Thomas laughed humorlessly. "The Hale Foundation doesn't own the house. It is the house." Before Ethan could react, the sound of footsteps echoed on the stairs. Margaret appeared, perfectly composed, as if she had just come from a formal meeting. "Mr. Caldwell," she said. "Mrs. Winchester built this place to hide things, not just to confuse spirits, but to protect very real secrets." Ethan kept his gaze steady. "And you continued her work." Margaret walked over to one of the boxes and opened it. Inside, a leather-bound notebook. "This is Sarah Winchester's real diary, not the edited version the public knows." She placed the diary on the table. "It can never be published, because it proves that the story about the curse is false," said Ethan. Margaret closed the diary firmly. "Because it proves that the Winchester fortune was embezzled even before her death by powerful men, industrialists, politicians, founding families of this country." She stared at Ethan. "My great-grandfather was one of them, Jonathan Hale." A heavy silence fell in the basement. Ethan understood. The mansion hadn't been built out of madness. It had been built as a distraction, an architectural theater to sustain a convenient legend, while millions disappeared into invisible financial structures. "And the foundation keeps the myth alive," Ethan said, "so that nobody goes looking for the real money." Margaret nodded. "This house is the biggest disguise ever built in America." Ethan raised the camera. "So the public deserves to know." Thomas stepped forward. "If you publish this, you won't leave here as a hero. You'll leave as the man who destroyed entire families, people who controlled banks, newspapers, courts." He pointed to the ceiling. "The entire country was built on this silence." Margaret slowly approached Ethan. "You came looking for historical truth. Now you have something bigger." She held out her hand. "Make your documentary. Show the house. Show the myth, but not what lies beneath it." Ethan hesitated. The recorder in his pocket captured everything. His heart raced. He knew this was the story of his career, maybe of his life. "But I also knew that I wouldn't get out of there easily if I said no. I need time to think," he said. Margaret smiled, pleased. "Of course, the house will give you that time." That night, Ethan weighed his options. There was no outside internet signal. The cell phone signal was blocked. The mansion was an analog and digital fortress. He decided to act. Using a USB drive, he copied the photographed files, recorded the basement audio, and digitized part of Sarah's diary. He saved everything on 3 separate devices. Around midnight, she heard footsteps stopping in front of her door. No knocking, just a presence. Minutes later, the power went out again. When it came back on, his laptop was empty. All the files had been deleted, except for one. Only one video remained intact, the part where Margaret said, "This house is the greatest disguise ever built in America." Ethan smiled slightly. They had erased what he wanted them to find, but not what he wanted to remain. The silent war had begun. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He knew that, from the moment he copied the files, he was no longer just a guest journalist. He had become a dangerous variable within a structure carefully controlled for generations. At dawn, Margaret awaited him in the inner garden, seated on a stone bench beneath an ancient fig tree. "You understand now," she said bluntly. "The house can't allow leaks." "I'm not your enemy," Ethan replied. "But I'm not part of your pact of silence either." Margaret remained silent for a few seconds. "Do you know why Sarah Winchester kept building this house without stopping?" "To feed the myth," said Ethan. "Yes, but also to stay alive." Margaret looked at the treetop. She knew that if she stopped building, the men who stole her fortune wouldn't need her as a distraction anymore. And then she would be discarded. Ethan realized that Margaret wasn't just talking about Sarah. She was talking about herself, about her own lineage trapped in that secret. Before they could continue, Thomas appeared in a hurry. "We have a problem." He handed Margaret a cell phone. "Outside call, red priority." Margaret answered. Her expression hardened. "I understand." "Yes. He shouldn't leave the property." She hung up and looked at Ethan. "The Hale Council knows you accessed the basement. They're arriving tonight." "Advice?" Ethan asked. "The descendants of the families involved." Margaret stood up. "When they arrive, your options disappear." The pressure now had a deadline. Hours, not days. Ethan returned to the room and reviewed the house map. "I needed an alternate exit route." That's when he noticed a note he had previously ignored: passageway of the East Tower, external access. He continued onto the tower. On the way, he encountered Thomas, who blocked his path. "You're going to try to escape," said the caretaker. "I need to publish this," Ethan replied. "If I stay, I'll be silenced." Thomas sighed. "My father worked for the Hales. My grandfather did too. This house has been paying for our lives for generations." He gestured down the hallways. "If the secret falls out, everything falls with it, including us." Ethan realized that Thomas wasn't just a guard. He was a prisoner, just as much as Margaret. "Do you think protecting this will save them?" Ethan asked. "Or just delay the inevitable?" Thomas didn't answer. He simply walked away, clearing the way. The East Tower was narrow. Spiral stairs led to an old wooden door. Ethan pushed it open. A cold wind rushed in. Outside, an iron staircase descended into the woods. Freedom. He was about to get off when he heard a voice behind him. "You can't take the material," Margaret said. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't threatening. She was simply stating a fact. "I already took it," said Ethan, touching the pocket where he kept the remaining flash drive. Margaret closed her eyes for a moment. "Then they will come after you. Not just here, outside of here. Always." Ethan went down the stairs. His feet touched the ground outside. He ran through the woods until he reached the main road. His car was still where he had left it. As I got in and started the engine, the headlights illuminated something blocking the exit, 2 black SUVs without license plates. Men in suits were getting out of the vehicles. The Hale Council had arrived earlier than expected. Ethan reversed, but another car was blocking the way. No way out. He turned off the engine, and he waited. The men in suits surrounded the car without haste. None of them carried visible weapons. It wasn't necessary. The power they wielded came from elsewhere. Influence, money, institutional control. The kind of power that didn't require explicit violence. The back door of one of the SUVs opened. Out stepped a white-haired gentleman, impeccable posture and a steely gaze. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, "my name is Richard Hale, President of the Council." Ethan slowly got out of the car. "You found what you shouldn't have," Richard continued, "but you can still choose how this story ends." Margaret appeared behind him. Her eyes held an ancient weight. Thomas watched from a distance, motionless. Richard gestured and 2 men approached. They searched Ethan and removed the flash drive from his pocket. "Now you have no more proof," Richard said, putting the device back in his jacket. Ethan smiled. "Are you sure?" Richard frowned. Margaret stared at him, realizing too late. "You left one file intact," Ethan said. "A single sentence, a confession." Richard understood at that instant. His gaze changed, not with anger, but with calculation. "Where's the video?" he asked. "Sent," Ethan replied. "Before coming to the tower, I found an outside connection on the old home phone line. The file is already in the public cloud, scheduled to automatically release if I don't log in within 24 hours. Margaret closed her eyes. Thomas took a deep breath. Richard remained silent for several long seconds. The wind swept through the mansion's gardens. The tall towers seemed to listen to the conversation. "You're smarter than I thought," Richard said finally. "But you don't understand what you've really been protecting." "I protected the truth," Ethan replied. Richard stepped forward. "No, you protected the myth." He pointed to the mansion. "If the public knew the fortune was stolen, they wouldn't believe it. They'd say it's just another conspiracy theory. But if they knew the house was built by a woman driven mad by guilt, they'd visit, buy tickets, watch documentaries, and keep looking the wrong way." Ethan realized the trap. "You're not afraid that I'll reveal the theft," he said. "You're afraid that I'll reveal that the theft was banal, human, no ghosts, no curse, just greed." Richard smiled. "Exactly." Margaret approached Ethan. "Sarah tried to tell the world," she said, "but nobody believed her, so she created the legend, and the world preferred the legend to the truth." Richard opened the door of the SUV. "Let's go back inside," he said. "We need to negotiate the next steps." Ethan looked at the blocked road. He had no choice. Back at the mansion, they went to the old music room. Richard sat down at the piano, playing a single key that echoed through the house. "Here's my offer," he said. "You'll make the documentary. You'll have full access to the house. You can tell everything about Sarah Winchester, about the myth, about the architectural obsession. You'll have a global audience, a guaranteed career." "And the robbery?" Ethan asked. "It will remain where it has always been, buried under concrete, wood, and legends." Ethan then realized the true nature of the mansion. It wasn't a prison. It was a vault, a collective psychological vault. Margaret placed Sarah's diary on the table. "Read the last page," she said. Ethan opened it. The shaky handwriting read, "If I tell the truth, no one will listen. If I create a ghost, everyone will believe it. So I build it." Ethan slowly closed the diary. The turning point was there. The curse had never existed. The ghost was invented, and the lie was more powerful than the truth. Richard extended his hand. "Mr. Caldwell, you understand the game now. The question is, do you want to win it or destroy it?" Ethan remained silent. knowing that any choice would change not only their lives, but the story the world had believed for over a century. Ethan did not shake Richard Hale's hand. The simple gesture, the silent refusal, broke the balance in the room. Margaret watched, Thomas looked away, and Richard held his hand outstretched for a second longer than was socially acceptable. Then he slowly withdrew it. "So you choose the hard way," Richard said. "I choose not to be part of the lie," Ethan replied. Richard showed no irritation. Men accustomed to power don't need to raise their voices. They simply change the atmosphere around them. "You will remain in the house until you decide to change your mind," he said. "Not as a prisoner, as a guest." "But without outside access," Margaret approached. "This is mercy," she said. "Others wouldn't have this chance." Ethan was led back to his room. The door wasn't locked. There was no need. The entire mansion was the lock. The following hours were filled with silent visits. First, Thomas brought the food. He didn't say anything. He just put down the tray and left. But before closing the door, he murmured, "The old phone line still works, sometimes." Then Margaret appeared with a box. "It belonged to Sarah," she said. "Perhaps you'll understand better if you know who she was beyond the myth." Inside the box, personal letters, bank receipts, telegrams, old newspaper clippings. Ethan spent hours analyzing them. He discovered payments made to politicians, military supply contracts, coded correspondence. The theft of the Winchester fortune was not an isolated heist. It was a national agreement. Meanwhile, Richard held meetings in the dining room with members of the council. Elegant men and women, all descendants of the beneficiary families. Their voices were low but determined. They decided Ethan's future as one decides the fate of an item in an inventory. That night, Margaret returned. "Richard wants to know your final decision tomorrow," she said. "If you accept the deal, you'll walk out the front door as a guest. If you refuse, the house will keep you invisible to the world." "You can't just erase me," Ethan said. Margaret tilted her head. "We can delay your existence until the world forgets your name. It happens every day." Ethan knew she was telling the truth. No physical threats, just institutional cancellation, endless lawsuits, bank freezes, media defamation, a social disappearance. After Margaret left, Ethan went down the hallway and headed to the East Tower. He needed to check if the phone line was still there. He found a small room with an old wall-mounted phone. Discreetly, he removed the bottom cover. An improvised wire was connected. Thomas had indeed kept the line. He dialed a number he knew by heart, an independent news outlet he knew. He called and called until a voice answered. "Free Press editorial staff." Ethan spoke quickly and to the point. He explained his location. He cited names, dates, the video, the diary, the Hale Council. He requested that they track down the scheduled video and make it public immediately. The line went down. Ethan remained motionless, waiting. Nothing happened. No alarm, no door opened. He went back to the room. Hours later, Ethan's cell phone, which remained without signal, vibrated. A single notification appeared. "File received. Publication in progress." His heart raced. There was no turning back now. The following morning, Richard was waiting at the main entrance, accompanied by Margaret and Thomas. "Your decision?" Richard asked. Ethan held up his phone, showing the notification. "The world already knows." Richard stared at the screen. His face remained unchanged. Only his eyes had become as cold as metal. "Then," he said, "the house will have to fulfill its ultimate purpose." Margaret closed her eyes. Thomas clenched his fists. Ethan didn't understand immediately, but upon hearing the first deep sound vibrating through the corridors, like ancient gears awakening, he realized that the Winchester mansion still held one last secret, and he had just activated it. The sound coursed through the mansion like a mechanical heart beating again after decades of slumber. Doors moved on their own, panels slid open, retractable staircases emerged from the walls. The entire house seemed to rearrange itself. Richard Hale showed no surprise. Sarah devised a final protocol, he said. If the secret were ever exposed, the house would become a permanent labyrinth. No one enters, no one leaves. Margaret approached Ethan. "You don't understand," she said. "This house was built to confound the world, but also to protect whoever was inside when everything crumbled outside." Thomas gazed at the transforming corridors as one might observe a living entity awakening. "She's closing," he murmured. Ethan realized that the danger now came not only from the people, it came from the architecture in motion, from the structure that was reconfiguring itself to prevent any escape. Without wasting any time, Ethan ran to the East Tower. The outer passage needed to remain open, but when he got there, he found only a smooth wall where the door had once been. He stepped back. He took a deep breath. There was no panic on his face, only focus. Before, Ethan reacted to events. Now he needed to lead them. He remembered the old map. He ran to the room, grabbed the yellowed paper and examined Sarah's handwritten notes, symbols, arrows, pencil marks that weren't on the printed map. Only those who know the purpose understand the path. Ethan understood. The house moved according to Sarah's logic, and Sarah had left clues for anyone who might one day need to face the labyrinth. He began to follow the markings, 3 steps to the right after each staircase. Count 7 doors before turning. Go up only when the ceiling was low. It was like solving a real-life physical puzzle. Thomas appeared in the hallway. "You won't be able to do it," he said. "I don't even know all the passages." "But Sarah knew," Ethan replied. "And she left a path." Thomas hesitated. Then he nodded. "I'll go with you." The pair made their way through the ever-changing corridors. Doors closed behind them. Staircases receded, but Sarah's notes guided every decision. Margaret watched them from a distance, torn between duty and guilt. Finally, she decided to follow them. "There's something you need to see," she said. He led them to a low door hidden behind a panel. Inside, a circular room. In the center, an iron safe bearing the Winchester symbol. "Here," said Margaret, "is Sarah's last record." The safe was unlocked. Inside, only an old audio tape. Thomas found a still functional recorder. He pressed play. Sarah Winchester's voice filled the space. "If anyone has heard this, it means the theater has fallen. The house has fulfilled its purpose. The myth has spread. But the truth must come out. Follow the path I have left. It leads out, not to freedom, but to the real world." Ethan understood that Sarah hadn't just been a victim. She had been a strategist. She had created the lie, but she had also left the seed of truth for anyone who dared to seek it. The walls trembled again. Time was short. Following the last marker on the map, they reached a narrow spiral staircase. At the top, a wooden hatch. Ethan pushed it open. Natural light flooded the space, the roof, the cold morning wind, the city in the distance. They had found a way out that didn't exist in the public records, but as they emerged, Richard Hale was waiting. Alone. No bodyguards, no threats. "You've grown, Mr. Caldwell," Richard said. "Before, you were just trying to expose. Now you understand the whole game." Ethan stepped forward. "The game is over," he replied. Richard smiled. "No. He just changed boards." He pointed to the horizon. Sirens blared through the city. Press helicopters flew overhead. Police cars arrived at the main entrance. Ethan's video had been published. The world was beginning to look at the Winchester mansion not as legend, but as evidence. Ethan then realized that his fight was no longer against a secret family, but against the chain reaction he himself had started, and for the first time he did not back down. At the top of the mansion, the wind was biting hard. Ethan, Thomas and Margaret remained near the open hatch, while Richard Hale watched the activity around the property. Police cars surrounded the gates. Journalists set up cameras. Drones flew over the house's twisting towers. The world was finally looking at the place, not because of ghost legends, but because of the revelation of a historic robbery. Thomas broke the silence. "If they get in, the house will completely shut down," he said. "The final protocol doesn't distinguish between the guilty and the innocent." Margaret nodded. "Sarah programmed the architecture to protect the truth only until it was revealed. After that, nobody knows what happens." Ethan realized that the house still held one last trap. The climax would not only be human, it would be physical, structural. "We need to turn off the mechanism," Ethan said, "before the police come in." Margaret looked at him in surprise. "Do you want to save the house?" "I want to save the people inside," Ethan replied, "including you." Thomas pointed to a smaller tower to the west. "The old control room, where Sarah coordinated the construction. If the system still exists, it will be there." Without wasting any time, the three descended again through the hatch. The interior of the mansion now seemed narrower. Corridors shortened, ceilings descended slowly. The labyrinth contracted. They ran, guided by Thomas, who knew paths that even the map didn't reveal. Each door they passed through closed behind them, sealing off their routes. They finally reached the west tower, an octagonal room with wooden panels and dozens of bronze levers. Gears creaked inside the walls. In the center, a large glass panel displays a complete blueprint of the house. Lights move, indicating doors open and close in real time. Margaret approached the levers. "This is the heart of the mansion," she said, "but only someone from the Hale family knows the final command." Richard Hale appeared at the door. "She's right," he said, "and I won't give that order." Thomas positioned himself between Richard and the panel. "You swore to protect this house," Thomas said, "not to destroy those inside." Richard answered without raising his voice. "This house has always been our shield. If the shield falls, we all fall." Ethan examined the dashboard. He noticed a single lever that was different from the others. No markings, no signs of wear, almost forgotten. He recalled Sarah's words in the recording. "The path leads outward, not to freedom, but to the real world." Ethan pulled the lever. The effect was immediate. A deep sound coursed through the structure. Lights on the panel stabilized. Doors returned to their original position. Stairs became fixed. The labyrinth stopped moving. Margaret stared at Ethan, astonished. "That lever wasn't part of the plan," she said. "It existed for Sarah," Ethan replied. "Not for you." Richard understood, too late. Control of the house was no longer in the hands of the Hale family. It was in the hands of whoever had discovered the whole truth. Outside, the main gates opened by themselves. The police entered. Journalists rushed in. The house, now motionless, allowed free passage. Thomas breathed a sigh of relief. "She let us go," he murmured. Margaret approached Ethan. "Sarah created the myth to hide the truth, but she also created a way out for anyone brave enough to find it." Richard Hale watched in silence. For the first time, there was no negotiation possible. The climax was approaching, and now all paths were open. The main door of the Winchester mansion swung open completely for the first time in decades, unchecked by the Hale Foundation. Police officers carefully traversed the hall, weapons lowered, wary of the unusual architecture. Journalists followed close behind, broadcasting live. The whole world was watching. Ethan, Margaret, Thomas, and Richard descended the central staircase slowly. Each step echoed like a gavel finalizing an ancient judgment. Upon reaching the lobby, a federal agent approached. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, "we have received your complaint. We need you to officially confirm the allegations." Ethan took a deep breath. The journalist, who had previously sought only a good story, now understood the true weight of his words. It was no longer about career, but about historical responsibility. "I confirm," he said. "The Hale Foundation and the board misappropriated a significant portion of the Winchester fortune and maintained the legend of the curse to cover up the crime." Cameras captured every syllable. The silence of the lobby was replaced by the frantic clicking of shutters. Richard Hale remained motionless, but Margaret stepped forward. "He's telling the truth," she said. "My family kept this secret for generations, and I was the final guardian." The statement was an unexpected twist. The heiress, who was supposed to protect the silence, chose to break it. Thomas looked at Margaret, surprised. Richard closed his eyes, defeated. "Sarah Winchester created a myth to survive," Margaret continued. "We maintained it to thrive. But time ran out." Agents approached Richard. Without resistance, he extended his hands to be handcuffed. His empire crumbled right there before the cameras. But the climax was not over yet. A metallic clang echoed off the walls again. The control panel, though stabilized, began flashing red lights. The old system was still reacting. Thomas ran to the West Tower. "The house still has stored energy," he shouted. "If we don't shut it off manually, parts of it could collapse." Ethan ran after him. Margaret did too. Richard stood there, watching his dynasty crumble before the eyes of the world. In the tower, the control panel trembled. Steam shot out of the metal joints. The entire structure vibrated. "Sarah didn't anticipate so many people coming in at once," Thomas said. "The structural weight won't hold." Ethan looked at the levers. One of them was flashing red. Without hesitation, he pulled the master power switch. A loud bang echoed through the house. Lights went out. Gears stopped. Silence fell suddenly. When the power came back on, the Winchester mansion was motionless, stable, finally just a house, not a trap. Ethan took a deep breath. The physical danger had passed. In the lobby, agents escorted members of the Hale Council out. Journalists bombarded the room with questions. The world watched the fall of a silent dynasty. Margaret approached Ethan. "You didn't just reveal the truth," she said. "You freed the house." Ethan looked around at the winding corridors, the impossible staircases, the place where myth and reality had mingled for over a century. He realized that he, too, had changed. Before, he hunted for stories. Now, he understood the human impact behind them. Thomas approached. "What happens now?" Ethan answered without hesitation. "Now the world will decide what to do with the truth." Outside, the sun streamed through the irregular towers of the mansion, illuminating for the first time, without shadows, the place where a lie had been built, and finally dismantled. The central conflict had been resolved. The myth had fallen. The truth remained. 3 months later, the Winchester mansion remained surrounded, not by Hale Foundation security, but by federal historic preservation teams. The place had become a national investigative heritage site. No longer a tourist attraction steeped in legends, but a symbol of how myths can be constructed to conceal real crimes. Ethan walked through the inner garden, now silent and open to the sky. Technicians catalogued each room. Historians analyzed recovered documents. The house was finally telling its true story. Her documentary had aired on all the major networks. Margaret Hale's confession video had become legal evidence. Lawsuits against banks, politicians, and corporations had been filed. The so-called Winchester robbery had entered the history books of contemporary times. Richard Hale awaited trial. The council had been dissolved, fortunes frozen, secret files revealed. An invisible empire had crumbled before the public eye. Margaret, for her part, had signed a cooperation agreement. In exchange for her full confession, she received a reduced sentence. Now, she was helping historians decipher the codes left by Sarah Winchester. Her last role as guardian had become repair work. Thomas remained at the mansion, no longer as the keeper of secrets, but as the official supervisor of the place. For the first time in his life, he was taking care of the house without carrying the weight of the lie. Ethan observed everything with serene detachment. His career had reached a new level. Invitations for lectures, interviews, and books came daily. but he had chosen to remain close to the story he had begun. He entered the old music room. The piano was still there. One key was slightly worn, the same one Richard Hale had played on the day of the negotiation. Ethan pressed the key. The sound echoed through the winding corridors. The mansion did not answer. It did not move. It did not close. It did not whisper. It was just wood, stone, and metal. The myth had died. In the center of the room, a display case held Sarah Winchester's original diary. On the last page, now translated and enlarged for visitors, it read, "If lies protected the world for a time, may the truth set it free afterward." Ethan smiled discreetly. Sarah Winchester had never been crazy. She had been a prisoner of a system that had used her as a facade, and in the end she had left clues so that someone, one day, would dismantle the illusion. Outside, children were taking photos. Tourists walked by, curious, not in search of ghosts, but of real history. Ethan left the mansion. The California sun illuminated the misaligned towers. He no longer felt the need to investigate that place. The cycle had closed. The truth was in the world, and that was enough. A year later, without fences or secrets, the Winchester mansion was receiving visitors daily. On a quiet morning, a tour guide opened a newly restored door on the third floor, one that had never appeared on old maps. Inside, there was only a small, empty room. On the wall, someone had discreetly engraved in almost imperceptible letters, "Houses don't hold ghosts, they hold choices." No one could say when that phrase appeared. But Ethan, upon seeing her in a photograph sent by Thomas, understood. Sarah had finally been heard. The history of the Winchester mansion has been passed off as legend for over a century. Ghosts, curses, madness. But as you've seen, reality can be much darker and much more human than any supernatural myth. How many other stories in the world have been distorted to hide inconvenient truths? How many ghosts have been created to distract our eyes from what really matters? If this story helped you see beyond the legend, share your thoughts. And remember, sometimes the greatest mystery isn't what's hidden in the shadows, but what everyone prefers not to see in the light.